She married tech billionaire for his money, but a shocking surprise was waiting. She thought it was just a transaction. He had the money and she had the charm. But what if the man she thought she was fooling was actually 2 steps ahead? Would you marry someone knowing you don't love them, hoping you'll never have to? And what if you're the one who ends up heartbroken? If you believe in sharing love, humility, and kindness so we can have a better world, hit the subscribe button. But if not, then do not subscribe. Chanel Reeves was tired of struggling. Life in Detroit had been nothing but hardship and dead ends. When her manipulative aunt pushed her to marry a mysterious tech billionaire for his money, Chanel didn't flinch. She saw it as a calculated move, a temporary role to secure her freedom from poverty. What she didn't expect was Graham Westbrook, the cold, reserved CEO with eyes that held stories she couldn't read. He agreed to the marriage with chilling ease and a prenup that gave her nothing. But as weeks turned into months, the man behind the billion-dollar empire began revealing something deeper. Secrets, regret, and maybe love. She wanted the money, but he wanted something more, something real. I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Thank you so much for being here, my beautiful story family. This story is full of twists, heartbreak, growth, and powerful moments that will leave you thinking. Get cozy and let's get into it. Now, let's begin. Chanel Reeves wiped the sweat from her brow as she balanced a tray of half-empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins. The diner smelled of burnt grease and desperation, and the hum of the ceiling fan did little to cut through the muggy Detroit heat. Her apron was stained, her sneakers were worn thin, and her bank account held a grand total of $12.47. She'd checked it that morning, hoping for a miracle after her 3rd shift of the week ended. This time at the gas station down the street. No miracle came. Just another day of scraping by, of counting pennies for bus fare, of wondering how much longer she could keep this up. She dumped the tray in the kitchen and leaned against the counter, her hands trembling from exhaustion. 3 jobs: diner waitress, gas station clerk, and the occasional gig cleaning offices downtown. And still the bills piled higher than she could climb. Rent was due in 5 days, and her landlord had already left 2 voicemails with that smug tone that made her skin crawl. "Chanel, darling, I can't keep giving you extensions." She hated that voice. She hated this life. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Chanel straightened, forcing a smile she didn't feel. But it wasn't a customer. It was her Aunt Nadine, strutting in with a leopard print scarf draped over her shoulders and a grin that promised trouble. Nadine was a hurricane of a woman, loud, brash, and always scheming. She slid into a booth near the window and waved Chanel over like she owned the place. "Girl, you look like death warmed over," Nadine said, her voice cutting through the diner's low buzz. She patted the cracked vinyl seat beside her. "Sit. We need to talk." "I'm working," Chanel muttered, glancing at the clock. 10 minutes until her break. She didn't have the energy for Nadine's nonsense today. "Work can wait. This is your future we're talking about." Nadine's eyes gleamed, sharp and calculating. She leaned forward, lowering her voice just enough to draw Chanel in. "I found you a way out." Chanel hesitated, then dropped into the booth, too tired to argue. "A way out? What, you gonna pay my rent?" Nadine laughed, a throaty sound that echoed off the diner walls. "Better than that, baby girl. I'm talking millions. A whole new life. No more slinging coffee or mopping floors." Chanel arched an eyebrow, skeptical. Nadine had a history of wild ideas, pyramid schemes, shady investments. That time she swore she'd met a guy who could get them on a reality TV show. None of it ever panned out. "I'm listening," she said, folding her arms. Nadine reached into her oversized purse and pulled out a glossy magazine, slapping it onto the table. The cover featured a man in a crisp suit, standing against a backdrop of sleek glass towers. His face was all angles, sharp jaw, piercing gray eyes, dark hair swept back with precision. The headline read, Graham Westbrook, the reclusive genius behind quantum tech. Graham Westbrook, Nadine said, tapping the photo with a manicured nail. Tech billionaire, 42 years old, single, and honey, he's looking for a wife. Chanel stared at the magazine, then at her aunt. You're joking? Do I look like I'm joking? Nadine's grin widened. I've got a connection, old friend from back in the day who works in his orbit. Word is he's tired of the gold diggers circling him. Wants someone real, someone he can trust. But here's the kicker. He's private, doesn't do the whole dating scene, so my friend says he's open to arrangements. Arrangements? Chanel's stomach twisted. What are you saying? I'm saying you marry him, Nadine said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Act pretty, play the part, and secure your future. He's got more money than God, Chanel. You'd never have to work another day in your life. Chanel laughed, sharp and bitter. You want me to just marry some stranger for money? Not some stranger. Graham Westbrook. Nadine leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Think about it. No more late nights, no more dodging landlords. You could have designer clothes, a mansion, a private jet. All you gotta do is say, I do, and stick it out for a while. Chanel's mind raced. It sounded insane, something out of a bad movie. But then she thought about her empty fridge, the eviction notice taped to her door last month, the way her body ached every night from standing on her feet for hours. She'd been fighting to survive for so long, and what did she have to show for it? Nothing. Maybe this was her chance. A calculated move, like Nadine said, a temporary role to escape the quicksand of poverty. What's in it for you? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Nadine never did anything out of the goodness of her heart. A finder's fee, Nadine admitted with a shrug. My friend's handling the details. I get a cut for bringing you in. But that's small potatoes compared to what you'll walk away with. Chanel picked up the magazine, studying Graham Westbrook's face. He looked cold, distant, like a man who didn't smile unless he had to. Could she do this? Marry someone she didn't know? Live a lie, all for a paycheck? Her heart thudded against her ribs, a mix of fear and something else. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. How do we even make this happen? She asked, her voice quieter now. Nadine's grin turned triumphant. Leave that to me. I'll set up the meeting. You just show up, look gorgeous, and let him see what a catch you are. 2 weeks later, Chanel stood outside a towering glass building downtown, her palms sweaty and her pulse racing. She'd borrowed a dress from Nadine, a sleek black number that hugged her curves and made her feel like someone else. Her hair was swept up, her makeup flawless, courtesy of Nadine's relentless coaching. First impressions, baby girl, her aunt had said, fussing over every detail. You gotta hook him fast. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, marble floors, modern art on the walls, a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion shoot. Chanel gave her name, half expecting to be laughed out of the building. Instead, the woman nodded and gestured to an elevator. Mr. Westbrook is expecting you. Top floor. The ride up felt endless. Chanel's reflection stared back at her in the mirrored walls. Wide brown eyes, full lips, a face that hid the chaos churning inside her. She wasn't sure what she'd say, how she'd convince a billionaire to marry her when she could barely convince herself this wasn't a mistake. But she'd come too far to back out now. The elevator doors opened into a sprawling office, all glass and steel, with a view of the city that made her breath catch. And there he was, Graham Westbrook, standing behind a desk, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. He was taller than she'd expected, broader too, with a quiet intensity that made her feel small. His gray eyes flicked up from the tablet in his hand, locking onto her with a scrutiny that sent a shiver down her spine. "Chanel Reeves," he said, his voice low and precise, like he was testing the weight of her name. He didn't smile, didn't move to greet her. Just stood there, watching. "That's me," she said, forcing confidence into her tone. She stepped forward, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you." He didn't take it. Instead, he set the tablet down and crossed his arms, his gaze never wavering. "Sit." She hesitated, then sank into the leather chair across from his desk, her rehearsed charm faltering under his stare. "So, I guess you know why I'm here?" "I do," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your aunt's friend was persistent. She says you're interested in a mutually beneficial arrangement." Chanel swallowed, her mouth dry. "Something like that?" Graham tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided to solve. "Let's be clear. I don't need a wife for love or companionship or whatever else you might be thinking. I need someone to play a role. Publicly. Privately, we're strangers. You get a stipend, enough to keep you comfortable. But there's a prenup. You walk away with nothing when it's over." Her stomach dropped. A stipend? She'd been expecting millions, a fortune to set her free. But his tone left no room for negotiation, and those eyes, God, those eyes, made her feel like he could see every crack in her armor. "Why me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He paused, his expression unreadable. "Because you're desperate enough to say yes." The words hit like a slap, but she didn't flinch. He wasn't wrong. And maybe that was the worst part. She couldn't argue with the truth. "Fine," she said, lifting her chin. "I'll do it." Graham nodded like he'd expected nothing less. He slid a stack of papers across the desk, legal documents, dense with text. "Read it. Sign it. We'll set a date." She stared at the prenup, her future reduced to ink and clauses. This wasn't the fairy tale Nadine had sold her, but it was a lifeline, and she'd clung to worse. The weeks that followed blurred together, dress fittings, paperwork, Nadine's endless chatter about how Chanel had hit the jackpot. The wedding was small, clinical, held in a courthouse with a judge who barely looked up from his desk. Graham stood beside her, his suit impeccable, his expression blank. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, his touch was cold, mechanical. "Congratulations, Mrs. Westbrook," he said, and the words sounded like a sentence, not a celebration. They moved into his penthouse that night, a sprawling, sterile space with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that looked untouched. He showed her to a guest room, separate from his own, and disappeared without another word. She stood there, alone, the weight of her choice pressing down on her. She'd wanted freedom, security. Instead, she felt like a ghost in a house that wasn't hers. Days turned into weeks, and Graham remained a mystery. He left early, came home late, spoke in clipped sentences when he spoke at all. Chanel tried to play the part, smiling at events, posing for photos, wearing the designer clothes that showed up in her closet like magic. But every time she reached for something more, a conversation, a connection, he shut her down. One night she found him in the kitchen, pouring a glass of whiskey. The city lights glittered outside, casting shadows across his face. She took a chance, leaning against the counter. "So, what's your deal, Graham?" "You've got everything. Why do this?" He didn't look at her, just swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "You think you're the first woman to try this?" Her breath caught. "Try what?" "Figuring me out. Getting something from me." He set the glass down, his eyes meeting hers at last. "I've seen it all before. You're not special." The words stung, but she forced a laugh, hiding the hurt. "Maybe I'm not, but you married me anyway." He didn't respond, just watched her with that same unreadable stare. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. But something shifted after that. She started noticing things, the way he lingered in doorways, watching her when he thought she didn't see. The late-night phone calls he took in hushed tones, his voice tight with something she couldn't place. The files she found on his desk one morning, labeled Project Erebus, stuffed with charts and numbers that made no sense to her. And the way he looked at her sometimes, like he was searching for something he'd lost. She'd come for the money. But Graham Westbrook was hiding something big. And the deeper she got, the more she wondered if she'd traded one trap for another. Chanel stood in the penthouse kitchen, the echo of Graham's footsteps fading down the hall. His parting words lingered in the air. "You're not special." Sharp as a blade, yet laced with something she couldn't pin down. Was it regret? Defiance? She clutched the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening. She'd signed up for this, hadn't she? A transactional marriage, a ticket out of the gutter. But the file on his desk, Project Erebus, and the way his gaze sometimes softened when he thought she wasn't looking, it gnawed at her. There was more to him, more to this, and she was starting to feel the pull of a mystery she hadn't bargained for. The next morning, the penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the city beyond the windows. Graham was gone again, vanished before dawn like he always did. She wandered the halls, her bare feet sinking into the plush rugs, the luxury around her feeling more like a cage with each passing day. The closet held racks of dresses she hadn't chosen, the fridge was stocked with food she didn't buy, and the walls gleamed with art she didn't understand. It was a life of plenty, but it wasn't hers. She was a guest here, a prop in Graham Westbrook's perfectly controlled world. Weeks bled into months, and the distance between them grew heavier. The wedding had been a spectacle, lavish beyond anything Chanel had ever seen, yet hollow as a drum. A ballroom draped in white roses and gold accents, a string quartet playing melodies no one danced to, a crowd of strangers in tailored suits and glittering gowns who clapped politely as she walked down the aisle. Graham had stood at the altar, his jaw tight, his gray eyes fixed somewhere beyond her. He'd said his vows in a voice so flat it could have been a business deal, and when he kissed her it was brief, perfunctory, a checkbox ticked. The photographers snapped their shots, the guests raised their champagne flutes, and then he was gone, retreating to his office with a murmured excuse about urgent calls. Now Chanel sat on the edge of a velvet sofa, staring at the city skyline that stretched out like a promise she couldn't touch. The penthouse was her domain by day, endless rooms of glass and marble, a rooftop terrace with a pool she never used, a staff that appeared and vanished like shadows. By night, it was Graham's fortress. He'd disappear into his office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, and she'd hear nothing but the occasional clink of a glass or the muffled cadence of his voice on the phone. She'd tried knocking once, early on, asking if he wanted dinner. "I'm fine," he'd said through the wood, his tone clipped. She hadn't tried again. Tonight, though, the silence felt different, thicker, charged. She padded down the hall, her silk robe whispering against her legs, and paused outside his office. Light seeped under the door, and she pressed her ear to the cool surface. His voice was low, urgent, the words too soft to catch, but the rhythm tense. No delays, she thought she heard, followed by a sharp, "Handle it." The call ended with a clatter, his phone hitting the desk, maybe, and then footsteps, heavy and deliberate. She stepped back just as the door swung open. Graham froze, his silhouette filling the frame. He was still in his suit, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was mussed, like he'd run his hands through it too many times, and those gray eyes pinned her in place. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice a quiet blade. She faltered, grasping for an excuse. "I heard something. Thought you might need, I don't know, coffee?" His gaze flicked over her, assessing, then softened, just for a heartbeat, before hardening again. "I don't need anything. Go to bed." He brushed past her, the scent of whiskey and cedar trailing in his wake. She watched him disappear into the kitchen, her chest tight with frustration. This was her life now, married to a man who treated her like a stranger, trapped in a golden prison she'd chosen. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead she turned back to her room, the door clicking shut behind her like a full stop. Days later, she found herself at a charity gala, arm looped through Graham's as cameras flashed around them. He played the part flawlessly, smiling just enough, nodding at the right moments, his hand resting lightly on hers. She wore a gown that cost more than her old apartment's rent, her hair swept into an elegant updo, but she felt like a doll on display. The crowd adored them, the enigmatic tech titan and his stunning new bride, and she hated how easy it was to fake it. "You're good at this," he murmured as they posed for another photo, his breath warm against her ear. "Years of practice," she shot back, keeping her smile in place. "You're not bad yourself." He didn't reply, but his fingers tightened on her arm for a fraction of a second, long enough to make her wonder. When the event ended, he drove them home in silence, the city lights streaking past like a dream she couldn't wake from. Back at the penthouse, he vanished into his office again, leaving her alone with the echo of her own thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something. The late nights, the locked doors, the way he'd look at her sometimes, like he wanted to say more but wouldn't. She started paying attention, collecting fragments. A scribbled note on the counter one morning. Erebus, Phase 2 confirmed. A delivery man who arrived with a sealed crate, only to be met by Graham at the elevator before she could ask questions. A phone call she overheard, his voice low and strained. "If this gets out, we're finished." One evening, restless and fed up, she poured herself a glass of wine and marched to his office. She didn't knock, just pushed the door open and stepped inside. Graham looked up from his desk, papers scattered around him, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. For once, he didn't tell her to leave. "What's Erebus?" she asked, her voice steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. His expression didn't change, but his hand stilled on the glass. "You've been snooping." "I live here," she said, stepping closer. "I'm not blind. You're hiding something, Graham, and I'm tired of feeling like a ghost in my own damn life." He set the glass down, slow and deliberate, and leaned back in his chair. "You want the truth?" "Yes," she said, her fists clenching at her sides. "I deserve that much." He studied her for a long moment, then stood, crossing the room until he was close enough for her to feel the heat radiating off him. "Erebus is a project," he said, his voice low. "A big one, bigger than you can imagine, and it's not your concern." "That's not an answer," she snapped, holding his gaze. "You don't get to shut me out. Not anymore." Something flickered in his eyes, anger maybe, or something deeper. "You think you're ready for this? For what I'm carrying?" "Try me," she said, her chin lifting. He exhaled, sharp and ragged, and for the first time she saw a crack in his armor, a man who wasn't just cold, but burdened. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "You want in? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." She sat, her heart pounding, the room thick with tension. Whatever Erebus was, whatever he was hiding, she was about to find out, and she had a feeling it would change everything. Chanel sat across from Graham in his office, the air between them heavy with unspoken questions. His warning echoed in her mind. "Don't say I didn't warn you." And his gray eyes held hers, daring her to push further. She could feel the weight of whatever Erebus was, a shadow stretching far beyond the desk littered with papers and the half-empty glass of whiskey. He hadn't told her much. Just that it was a project, something massive, something she wasn't ready for. But the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers flexed against the armrest, told her more than his words ever could. He was a man on edge, and she was teetering on the brink of something she couldn't unsee. "Start talking," she said, crossing her arms, "or I'll find out myself." Graham's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment she thought he'd shut her out again. But then he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his voice dropping low. "You think you're the first to demand answers? People have tried. Reporters, rivals, even friends. They don't walk away happy, Chanel. They walk away empty. Or worse." Her pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not them. I'm your wife." He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "A title on paper. Don't pretend it's more." The words stung, but she swallowed the hurt, meeting his gaze head-on. "Maybe it's not. But I'm here and I'm not leaving until you give me something real." He stared at her, long and hard, then stood abruptly, grabbing his glass and draining it in one swallow. "Fine," he said, his voice rough. "You want real? Stay out of my way. That's the best I can offer." He brushed past her, leaving the office door ajar and the room suffocatingly silent. She didn't follow him. Not yet. But as she sat there, the faint hum of the city filtering through the windows, she knew one thing for certain. Graham Westbrook was a locked vault, and she just found the first hairline crack. Days later, the penthouse felt emptier than ever. Graham was gone again. Some overnight trip to Chicago, he'd said, his tone clipped as he packed a bag and left without a backward glance. Chanel wandered the halls, restless, her mind replaying their confrontation. "Stay out of my way." It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it wasn't a comfort either. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding more than a project, something personal, something that cut deeper than business deals and billions. She found herself in front of a door she'd never noticed before, tucked at the end of a corridor near the guest wing. It was unmarked, unassuming, but the handle was cold to the touch, like it hadn't been turned in years. Curiosity tugged at her, sharp and insistent. Graham wasn't here to stop her. No staff lingered nearby. She twisted the knob, half expecting it to be locked, but it gave way with a soft click. The room beyond was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the city filtering through a single narrow window. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books and boxes, and a desk sat in the center, covered in dust. She stepped inside, her breath catching as her eyes adjusted. Photographs were pinned to a corkboard above the desk, grainy shots of people she didn't recognize, some laughing, some staring blankly at the camera. A woman with dark hair and a guarded smile appeared in several, her face hauntingly familiar, though Chanel couldn't place her. She moved to the desk, her fingers brushing over a stack of leather-bound journals. The top one was worn, its edges frayed, and she hesitated before flipping it open. The handwriting was Graham's, sharp, precise, unmistakable. Pages were filled with dates, notes, fragments of thoughts. March 12th. She's asking questions again. June 4th. The numbers don't lie, but she does. Her heart thudded as she turned to the last entry, dated 3 years ago. She thought she could fool me too. Chanel froze, the words sinking into her like ice. Who was she? A lover? A partner? Someone tied to Erebus? The journal slipped from her hands, hitting the desk with a dull thud, and a photograph fluttered out from between the pages. It was the woman from the corkboard standing beside Graham. He was younger, his arm around her shoulders, a rare smile softening his features. On the back, in his handwriting, Lila, 2019. Her mind raced. Lila. The name meant nothing to her, but the intimacy in that photo, the way he'd looked at her, twisted something in Chanel's chest. Jealousy. No, that was ridiculous. She didn't care about Graham like that. Did she? She shoved the photo back into the journal, her hands trembling, and grabbed another from the stack. This one was newer, the entries shorter, angrier. They'll pay for this. No one walks away clean. Erebus is the key. She was so lost in the words that she didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind her. "What the hell are you doing?" Graham's voice cut through the silence, low and dangerous. She spun around, the journal still in her hands, and found him in the doorway, his coat dusted with rain, his eyes blazing with something she'd never seen before, raw, unguarded fury. She faltered, clutching the journal like a shield. "You're supposed to be in Chicago." "Plans changed," he said, stepping into the room. He didn't look at the photographs, the journals, just at her, his gaze searing. "I told you to stay out of my way." "And I told you I'm tired of being shut out," she shot back, her voice shaking but firm. "Who's Lila? What's Erebus? Why are you keeping all this from me?" He stopped inches from her, his breath uneven. "You don't get to ask that." "I'm your wife," she said, throwing his own words back at him. "I get to ask anything I damn well please." For a moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he reached past her, snatching the journal from her hands and slamming it onto the desk. "Lila's gone," he said, his voice cracking on the edges. "That's all you need to know." "Gone where?" she pressed, stepping closer despite the storm in his eyes. "What happened to her? What are you so afraid of?" He laughed, a jagged sound that made her flinch. "You think I'm afraid? You have no idea what's at stake here." "Then tell me," she said, her voice softening, pleading. "Let me in, Graham." Just once. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling, and for a split second she thought he might. But then he turned away, raking a hand through his hair. "Get out," he said, quieter now, defeated. "This doesn't concern you." She didn't move. "It does if it's tearing you apart." He didn't respond, just stood there, his back to her, the room suffocatingly still. She wanted to push, to demand more, but something in his silence stopped her. She left the room, the door clicking shut behind her, her mind a tangle of questions and half-formed fears. "Okay, quick break here. If someone you married turned out to be nothing like you expected, would you stay or run? Comment below. What would you do? I'd love to hear your thoughts, because Chanel's about to face that choice head-on." Back in her room, Chanel couldn't sleep. The photographs, the journals, Graham's reaction, they spun through her mind like a reel she couldn't pause. Lila. Erebus. A past he wouldn't share, a project he wouldn't explain. She'd wanted his money, his security, but now she was caught in something bigger, something that felt like it could swallow her whole. And the worst part, she wasn't sure she wanted to run anymore. Not from him. Down the hall, Graham sat in the hidden room, the journal open in front of him. His fingers traced Lila's name, his jaw tight. Chanel had cracked the facade he'd built so carefully, and he hated her for it, hated himself more. Because the truth, the real truth, was closer than she knew, and letting her in might destroy them both. If someone you married turned out to be nothing like you expected, would you stay or run? Comment down below. What would you do? Chanel lingered in the doorway of her room, the echo of Graham's defeated "Get out" still ringing in her ears. The hidden room, with its photographs and cryptic journals, felt like a wound she'd torn open. His wound. Maybe hers, too. She'd seen the crack in him, the raw edge of a man who wasn't just cold, but broken, and it left her unsteady. Lila's name burned in her mind, a ghost she couldn't confront, and Erebus loomed like a shadow she couldn't touch. She'd stormed out of that room demanding answers, but now, alone in the silence, she wasn't sure what she'd do with them if she got them. Her plan: marry the billionaire, secure the bag, walk away, felt flimsy, a thread fraying under the weight of something she hadn't expected. Feeling. The next morning, Graham was gone again, the penthouse a hollow shell. She found a note on the kitchen counter, his handwriting stark against the white paper. Back tomorrow. Don't wait up. No explanation, no warmth, just the same clipped distance she'd grown used to. She crumpled it in her fist, anger flaring, then smoothed it out and left it there, a quiet rebellion. She wasn't his employee, his puppet. She was his wife, damn it, and he couldn't keep treating her like she didn't exist. But then, something shifted. He came back the next evening, rain-soaked and quiet, and instead of disappearing into his office, he paused in the living room where she sat flipping through a magazine she wasn't reading. "You're still up," he said, his voice softer than usual, almost surprised. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, glancing at him. His coat dripped onto the hardwood, and his eyes, those gray, guarded eyes, held hers for a beat too long. He nodded, then hesitated, like he was weighing something. "There's a package for you, on the table." He turned and walked away before she could respond. She found it in the foyer, a sleek black box tied with a silver ribbon. Inside was a necklace, delicate and shimmering, with a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. No note, no explanation, just the kind of gift that made her breath catch and her suspicions flare. Was this an apology? A bribe? She clasped it around her neck, the cool metal settling against her skin, and caught her reflection in the mirror. It looked like it belonged there, like he'd known it would. The days that followed were a blur of contradictions. One morning she woke to the smell of coffee and found Graham in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a focus that bordered on absurd. He didn't say much, just slid a plate toward her and sat across the island, sipping his coffee while she ate. "You cook?" she asked, half teasing, half stunned. "Sometimes," he said, a flicker of a smile tugging at his lips. "Don't get used to it." She didn't. But it happened again a week later, scrambled eggs this time, with bacon so crisp it snapped between her fingers. He lingered longer, asking about her day, listening when she rambled about the barista who'd spilled latte on her dress at some overpriced cafe. His responses were short, but his attention was real, and it threw her off balance. Then came the touches. A hand brushing her arm as he passed her in the hall, light enough to be accidental but deliberate enough to make her pulse jump. A finger tucking a strand of hair behind her ear during a rare movie night he'd suggested, his touch lingering a second too long. She'd frozen, popcorn forgotten in her lap, and he'd pulled back like nothing happened, his eyes fixed on the screen. But something had happened, and it was unraveling her. One evening she found a bouquet of lilies on her bed, her favorite flower, though she'd never told him that. She stared at them, her chest tight, and whispered to herself, "I thought I was using you, but why does this hurt?" The words slipped out, raw and unguarded, and she sank onto the mattress, the petals brushing her fingertips. She'd built walls around her heart, high, solid, meant to keep this marriage a transaction. But Graham was slipping through the cracks, and she didn't know how to stop it. The next day they walked through the rooftop garden, a space she'd avoided until he'd insisted she see it. The air was crisp, the city sprawling below them, and he handed her a glass of wine, his fingers grazing hers. "You look lost up here," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "Maybe I am," she admitted, meeting his gaze. "I don't know what we're doing anymore, Graham." He didn't answer right away, just sipped his wine and looked out at the skyline. "Neither do I," he said finally, and the honesty in his tone hit her like a wave. "But I don't hate it." Her breath caught. "You don't hate me." His eyes flicked back to her, softer than she'd ever seen them. "No, Chanel, I don't hate you." She wanted to ask more, about Lila, about Erebus, about the man he'd been before she walked into his life, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she stepped closer, testing the space between them, and he didn't pull away. His hand found hers, tentative, warm, and for a moment they stood there, the city humming below, the tension shifting into something fragile and new. But later that night, alone in her room, the doubt crept back. She paced, the necklace glinting in the mirror, the lilies wilting on her nightstand. Was this real? Or was it a game? Another layer of control, a way to keep her compliant? She'd seen the journals, the photographs, the anger in his eyes when she'd pushed too far. This warmth, these gestures, were they a mask hiding the same secrets he'd locked away in that hidden room? She confronted him the next morning, finding him in the kitchen, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he poured coffee. "What's this about?" she asked, holding up the necklace, her voice trembling. "The gifts, the breakfasts, everything. What do you want from me?" He set the pot down, turning to face her, his expression unreadable. "What do you think I want?" "I don't know," she snapped, her frustration boiling over. "I thought I had you figured out. Cold, distant, all business. Now you're acting like you care. And I don't know what's true anymore." He stepped closer, his voice steady but laced with something raw. "Maybe I do care. Is that so hard to believe?" "Yes," she said, her eyes burning, "because you've kept me in the dark since day one. Lila, Erebus, whatever you're hiding, it's still there, Graham. And I can't trust this until I know what's behind it." He flinched, just barely, but she saw it. "You want trust?" he asked, his tone hardening. "Trust goes both ways. You came here for my money. Don't pretend you didn't." The accusation stung, but she didn't back down. "I did, and you knew that. But this—" She gestured between them, the air crackling with tension. "This wasn't part of the deal." He stared at her, his jaw tight, then turned away, gripping the counter. "Maybe it wasn't," he muttered, so quiet she almost missed it. "Maybe I didn't expect you." She froze, her heart pounding. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer, just walked out, leaving her with the coffee cooling on the counter and a storm of confusion in her chest. She'd wanted his wealth, his security, nothing more. But now, with every touch, every glance, she felt herself slipping, and the pain of it was a blade she couldn't pull out. Chanel stood in the kitchen, the cold coffee on the counter a silent witness to Graham's retreat. His words, "Maybe I didn't expect you," hung in the air, a confession she couldn't unravel. Her fingers tightened around the crescent moon necklace, its weight a tether to the warmth he'd shown her. But his silence, his refusal to bridge the gap, reignited her doubts. She'd come for his money, yes, but this ache in her chest wasn't part of the plan. She wanted to hate him for it, for cracking her defenses, for making her care, but instead she felt the pull of something deeper, something she couldn't name. The lilies on her nightstand were browning at the edges, and she wondered if whatever this was between them was wilting too. The day passed in a haze. Graham stayed gone, locked in his office or out on some errand he didn't explain, and the penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Beautiful, lifeless, hers, but not hers. She tried to distract herself, flipping through channels, scrolling her phone. But her mind kept circling back to him. The breakfasts, the soft touches, the way he'd looked at her on the rooftop, like she was more than a signature on a prenup. It clashed with the journals, the photographs, the secrets he guarded like a fortress. She was drowning in questions, and he wasn't giving her air. That night, a storm rolled in, thunder rumbling through the city like a warning. Rain lashed the windows, blurring the skyline into streaks of light, and Chanel stood in the living room, watching the chaos outside mirror the mess inside her. She didn't hear Graham approach until he was there, his shadow falling across the glass. He was in a dark sweater, hair damp from the rain, and his eyes, those gray, piercing eyes, were softer than she'd seen them in weeks. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice low, cutting through the storm's growl. She turned, crossing her arms like armor. Not with all this noise. You? He shrugged, stepping closer. Same. Thought I'd check on you. The words caught her off guard. Check on me? Since when do you care? He didn't flinch, just held her gaze. Since you started asking questions, I can't answer. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. That's a hell of a way to show it. Shutting me out, disappearing, acting like I'm some inconvenience you can bribe with jewelry and pancakes. He winced, just enough for her to notice, and ran a hand through his wet hair. I'm not good at this, Chanel. At people. No kidding, she said, but her tone softened. What's so hard about letting me in? Just a little? He exhaled, slow and ragged, and sank onto the sofa, staring at the rain. It's not about you. It's about me. What I've done. What I'm still doing. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of him, far enough to keep her guard up. Erebus? She asked, testing the waters. He nodded, barely. Among other things. Tell me, she said, quieter now, almost a plea. Give me something, Graham. I can't keep living like this, half in, half out. He turned to her, his face shadowed, but his eyes bright with something raw. You think you want the truth, but you don't. It's heavy, it's messy, and once you know, there's no going back. I'm already in too deep, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't plan on this, on you, but here I am, so don't tell me I can't handle it. He studied her, long and silent, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I built Erebus to fix something, he said, his words measured. Something I broke a long time ago. Lila, she was part of it. She trusted me and I failed her. Now it's bigger than me, bigger than us, and I can't stop it. Her heart thudded. Failed her how? He shook his head, his jaw tight. Doesn't matter. She's gone, and I'm still paying for it. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something in her. She reached out, tentative, her hand resting on his arm. You don't have to pay alone. He looked at her hand, then at her, and the air shifted, charged, electric. You don't know what you're offering, he murmured. Maybe not, she said, her throat tight. But I'm offering it anyway. He moved before she could think, closing the distance between them. His lips found hers, slow and deliberate, a kiss that felt like a question and an answer all at once. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate, just deep, meaningful, tasting of rain and regret. Her hands slid to his shoulders, his curled around her waist, and for a moment the storm outside faded, leaving only the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they pulled apart, breathless, his forehead rested against hers. I didn't mean for this, he whispered. Neither did I, she said, her voice barely audible. They stayed like that, tangled in each other, until the thunder lulled and exhaustion took over. She fell asleep in his arms, the sofa cradling them both, his breath soft against her hair. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the windows. Chanel woke to the weight of Graham's arm around her, his chest rising and falling beneath her cheek. She didn't move, didn't want to break the fragile piece of it. But as her eyes traced the lines of his face, relaxed in sleep, unguarded for once, her mind spun. Last night had changed everything. The kiss, his confession, the way he'd held her like she was something precious. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. She'd married him for his money, a cold, calculated move, but now her heart was in the game, and she didn't know the rules. She slipped out of his grasp, careful not to wake him, and padded to the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The rain had stopped, leaving the city quiet, but inside her a storm raged. What am I doing? She muttered, staring at her reflection in the glass door. The woman looking back was a stranger. wide-eyed, vulnerable, caught between the plan she'd made and the man she was falling for. She brewed coffee, the routine grounding her, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. Lila, Erebus. His words, "I failed her," echoed, heavy with guilt she couldn't fully grasp. Was he using this closeness to keep her quiet, to pull her deeper into his world? Or was it real, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself? She wanted to believe it was real. God, she wanted to. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not yet. Graham stirred in the living room, his voice rough with sleep. "You're up early." She turned, leaning against the counter, the mug warm in her hands. Couldn't stay still. Too much to think about. He sat up, rubbing his face, and met her gaze. "Last night." "Don't," she cut in, softer than she meant. "Don't say it was a mistake, not yet." He stood, crossing to her, and stopped just short of touching her. "It wasn't," he said, his voice firm, "but it complicates things." "Everything about you complicates things," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite herself. He didn't smile back, but his hand brushed her cheek, light and fleeting. "I know." She wanted to ask more, to demand the full story of Lila, of Erebus, of what he meant by failing. But the moment felt too fragile, too new. Instead, she let the silence stretch, her heart pounding with questions she wasn't ready to voice. Chanel leaned against the kitchen counter, the warmth of her coffee mug grounding her as Graham's touch lingered on her cheek, light, fleeting, but heavy with meaning. The kiss from last night still burned in her memory, slow and deep, a moment that had tilted her world off its axis. She'd woken in his arms, his breath soft against her hair, and for a heartbeat she'd let herself believe this could be real. But now, with daylight streaming through the penthouse and his guarded eyes watching her, the questions clawed back. Lila, Erebus, his vague confession about failing someone. She wanted to trust the warmth in his touch, the honesty in his voice when he'd said the kiss wasn't a mistake, but doubt was a stubborn shadow, and it followed her every step. "I should get to work," Graham said, breaking the silence. His tone was even, but his gaze held hers a moment longer, like he was searching for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or reassurance. "Yeah," she replied, forcing a small smile. "Don't let me keep you." He nodded, grabbing his jacket from the back of a chair, but paused at the door. "We'll talk tonight," he said, quieter now. "Really talk." She didn't respond, just watched him go, the click of the door echoing in the empty kitchen. Really talk. The promise felt like a lifeline, but she'd heard promises before, Nadine's schemes, her own desperate plans, and they rarely held up. She set the mug down, her fingers brushing the crescent moon necklace, and wondered if she was falling for a man or a mirage. The day dragged on, heavy with anticipation. Graham's absence left the penthouse too quiet, and Chanel's thoughts spiraled, replaying the kiss. His half-answers about Lila, the weight of Erebus hanging over them like a storm cloud. By evening, she was restless, pacing the rooftop garden where they'd stood days ago, his hand warm in hers. "I don't hate you," he'd said, and she'd clung to that. But now it felt fragile, like glass she could shatter with one wrong move. That night, they were due at a gala, some high-profile tech fundraiser Graham couldn't skip. She dressed in a gown of deep emerald, the fabric clinging to her curves, and slipped on the necklace he'd given her, its pendant catching the light. When Graham saw her, his eyes softened, and he offered his arm without a word. The ride to the venue was silent, but his hand rested on hers, a quiet anchor in the dark. The gala was a glittering whirlwind, chandeliers dripping with crystal, champagne flutes clinking, and a sea of faces Chanel didn't know. Graham played his part perfectly, smiling for photos, shaking hands, his charm effortless but distant. She matched him, her smile practiced, her laughter timed just right, but her mind was elsewhere, on his promise to talk, on the kiss that still lingered like a bruise. She excused herself to the powder room, needing a moment to breathe, and that's when she saw her. A woman stood at the mirror, adjusting a sleek chignon, her dress a bold crimson that demanded attention. She was striking, tall, poised, with eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. Chanel froze, something about her tugging at a memory she couldn't place. "You're Chanel," the woman said, her voice smooth but edged like a blade wrapped in silk. She didn't turn, just met Chanel's gaze in the mirror. "Do I know you?" Chanel asked, her tone cautious. The woman smiled, sharp and knowing. "Not yet. I'm Nova." She turned then, leaning against the sink, her posture casual but predatory. "Graham's latest project, aren't you?" Chanel's stomach twisted. "His wife, actually." Nova laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent a chill down Chanel's spine. "Wife, that's cute. You're just a stand-in, sweetheart, a placeholder. He's done this before." The words hit like a punch, but Chanel kept her face neutral, years of faking confidence kicking in. "You seem to know a lot about him. Ex-girlfriend?" "Something like that," Nova said, stepping closer. "I know he's good at making you feel special. Gifts, kisses, those little moments that make you think you matter. But it's all a game. He needed a face for the cameras, a name on the papers. That's you. For now." Chanel's heart pounded, but she didn't back down. "If you've got a point, make it." Nova's smile didn't waver. "My point is, don't get comfortable. Graham doesn't keep people around when they stop being useful. Ask Lila." The name dropped like a stone, and Chanel's breath caught. "What do you know about Lila?" "Enough," Nova said, her eyes narrowing. "More than you, clearly." She brushed past Chanel, her perfume sharp and lingering, and paused at the door. "Enjoy the gala, Mrs. Westbrook. It's a beautiful lie while it lasts." Chanel stood frozen, her reflection staring back at her, pale and shaken. Nova's words clawed at the fragile trust she'd started to build with Graham. His warmth, the kiss, his promise to talk. Was it all a lie? A performance to keep her in line? She splashed cold water on her wrists, steadying herself, then returned to the gala, her smile a mask. Graham found her near the bar, his hand grazing her back. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, concerned. She nodded, but her eyes scanned his face, searching for the truth. "Just needed a breather. Who's Nova?" His expression didn't change, but his hand stilled, just for a second. "Nova," he repeated, like he was buying time. "She's an old colleague, works in tech. Why?" "She knows you," Chanel said, watching him closely. "Said some things about me being a stand-in." His jaw tightened and he glanced across the room, his gaze sharpening. "She talked to you?" "Yeah," Chanel said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Said you've done this before." "With Lila?" He exhaled, sharp and frustrated, and pulled her gently to a quieter corner. "Nova's bitter. She was part of a project years ago, didn't take it well when it ended. She's trying to get under your skin." "So I'm not a stand-in?" she asked, her throat tight. "No," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You're not." I swear she wanted to believe him. God, she did. But Nova's words echoed, mingling with the journals, the photographs, the secrets he still wouldn't share. "Then why does it feel like I'm fighting for scraps of you?" she whispered. He reached for her hand, his grip firm but careful. "You're not. I'm Erebus. It's complicated, Chanel. But you're not a placeholder. Not to me." She pulled her hand back, her heart a tangle of hope and doubt. "I want to believe you, Graham, but I need more than words." He nodded, his face shadowed. I know. I'll show you. Just give me time." She didn't answer, just turned back to the crowd, her smile slipping back into place. But inside she was unraveling, Nova's voice a poison she couldn't shake. Was she Graham's wife or his pawn? The kiss, the warmth, the man she'd glimpsed. Were they real, or was she just another name in his story, destined to fade like Lila? Chanel stood at the edge of the gala crowd, Graham's promise, "I'll show you," ringing hollow in her ears. His hand had been warm on hers, his eyes earnest, but Nova's venomous words, "You're just a stand-in," clawed at her, tearing holes in the fragile trust she'd stitched together. She watched him across the room, charming a group of investors, his smile tight but convincing. He'd denied Nova's claims, called her bitter, but the doubt festered, fueled by Lila's ghost and Erebus's shadow. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the kiss, the breakfasts, the moments he'd let her in, but every step forward with Graham felt like a gamble, and she was running out of chips. The ride home was quiet, the city lights streaking past like a lifeline she couldn't grab. Graham's hand rested on the console between them, close but not touching, and she didn't reach for it. "You're quiet," he said, glancing at her as they pulled into the penthouse garage. "Just tired," she lied, forcing a smile. "Long night?" He nodded, but his eyes lingered, searching. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said, echoing his earlier promise. "I mean it." She didn't respond, just followed him into the elevator, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions. Tomorrow. Another delay, another chance for him to pull back. She wasn't sure how much longer she could wait. The next day, Graham was out early. Some meeting, he'd said, leaving a note on the counter. Back by noon. She spent the morning restless, pacing the penthouse, her mind a battlefield. Nova's voice, Graham's half-truths, the journals. They swirled together, a storm she couldn't escape. She needed air, needed clarity, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Around 11, she heard the elevator hum, then voices. Graham's, low and clipped, and another unfamiliar male with a clipped accent. She froze in the living room, the open layout giving her no cover as they stepped out. Graham didn't see her, his back to her, as he led the man toward his office. The stranger was tall, lean, with sharp features and a suit that screamed money. Someone important, someone who belonged in Graham's world. "Reese, this isn't the time," Graham said, his tone tight as they paused near the office door. "It's past time," the man, Reese, replied, his voice cool, commanding. "You said it'd be quick. She wasn't supposed to stay this long." Chanel's breath caught, her body going still. She. The word hit like a stone, and she pressed herself against the wall, out of sight but close enough to hear. "She's not a problem," Graham said, his voice lower now, defensive. "I've got it handled." Reese laughed, sharp and dry. "Handled? She's still here, Graham, asking questions, digging around. You're slipping, mate. Erebus can't afford loose ends." "She's not a loose end," Graham snapped, and the edge in his tone made Chanel's heart lurch. It's complicated." "Complicated's how we got here," Reese said, his voice hardening. "Lila was complicated too, and look where that landed us. Cut her loose before she figures it out." The office door clicked shut behind them, muffling the rest, but Chanel didn't need more. Her knees buckled, and she slid down the wall, her pulse roaring in her ears. She wasn't supposed to stay this long. The words carved into her, sharp and cold, slicing through the kiss, the gifts, the promises. She'd been a fool, building hope on sand, believing Graham's warmth was anything but a leash to keep her close until he didn't need her anymore. Nova had been right. She was a stand-in, a temporary fix, and now the clock had run out. She stumbled to her room, tears burning her eyes, and yanked a suitcase from the closet. Her hands shook as she threw clothes inside, dresses he'd bought her, the necklace he'd given her, symbols of a lie she'd let herself believe. Stupid, she muttered, shoving a sweater into the bag. So damn stupid. The crescent moon pendant clattered onto the dresser, and she stared at it, her chest heaving. She'd come for his money, but she'd stayed for him, for the man she thought he could be. And he'd played her, just like Reese said. The journals flashed in her mind. Lila's name. She thought she could fool me too, and a sick realization twisted her gut. Was that her fate? To be another name in his ledger, another failure he'd bury under Erebus's weight? She zipped the suitcase, her resolve hardening, but her heart cracked with every move. She loved him. God help her, she did. And that made this hurt worse than anything she'd felt in Detroit, worse than the hunger, the eviction notices, the endless grind. She dragged the bag to the living room, her shoes echoing on the hardwood, and stopped short. Graham stood there alone now, his coat still on, his face tightening as he saw the suitcase. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. "I heard you," she said, her throat raw. "You and Reese. She wasn't supposed to stay this long. I'm done, Graham." His eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through his calm. "Chanel, wait." "No," she cut him off, stepping back as he reached for her. "Don't. I trusted you, against every instinct I had, and you were just... What? Keeping me around until you didn't need me? Like Lila?" He flinched, her name hitting him like a blow. "It's not like that. You don't understand." "Then make me understand," she shouted, tears spilling over. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm not some disposable piece in your game." He stepped closer, his hands outstretched, pleading. "You're not disposable. Reese, he's pushing me, but he doesn't get it. I didn't plan this, us. I didn't want to feel anything, but I do, Chanel. I swear." She shook her head, backing toward the elevator. "You've had months to prove that. All I've got is secrets and half-lies. I can't do this anymore." "Chanel, please," he said, his voice breaking. "Let me explain. Erebus, Lila, it's not what you think. I need you to stay." "Why?" she demanded, her hand hovering over the elevator button. "So you can handle me? Tie up your loose end?" "No," he said, his eyes locking onto hers, desperate. "Because I love you." The words stopped her cold, her finger trembling above the button. Love. It was a grenade he'd thrown, and she didn't know if it was real or a last-ditch play to keep her from walking out. Her suitcase sat heavy at her feet, her heart a battlefield of rage and longing. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt, but the truth had dropped, and it left her broken. Chanel stood frozen by the elevator, Graham's "I love you" crashing through her like a wave she couldn't ride. Her suitcase rested at her feet, a lifeline to the escape she'd planned, but his eyes, raw, desperate, pleading, held her in place. The weight of Reese's words. She wasn't supposed to stay this long. Still cut deep, and her heartbreak warred with the flicker of hope his confession ignited. She wanted to press the button, to walk away from the secrets, the half-truths, the pain of loving a man who might have played her from the start. But her hand hovered, trembling, and she couldn't move. "Say something," Graham urged, his voice rough, stepping closer. "Yell at me, leave, anything, just don't stand there." "What am I supposed to say?" she snapped, her tears hot on her cheeks. "You drop that on me now after everything, Nova, Reese, Lila, and I'm supposed to believe it? How do I know this isn't just another way to keep me here?" "It's not," he said, his hands clenching at his sides. "I've been an idiot, Chanel. I've pushed you away, kept you in the dark, because I thought it'd be easier for both of us. But it's the truth. I love you." She laughed, a jagged sound that hurt coming out. "You don't even know me. You married me because I was desperate, because it fit your plan. And now I'm supposed to buy this? He shook his head, his jaw tight. I know you better than you think. I know you fight when you're scared, that you hide your hurt behind that damn smile. I know you stayed even when I gave you every reason to go. That's why I'm asking you to stay now. Her breath hitched, his words slicing through her defenses, but she pressed the elevator button anyway. The doors slid open, and she stepped inside, dragging her suitcase with her. I need time, she said, her voice breaking. I can't do this. Not like this. Graham didn't follow, just stood there, his face a mask of regret as the doors closed between them. She leaned against the wall, her chest heaving, and let the tears fall as the elevator descended. Love. It was a word she'd never trusted, not in Detroit, not with Nadine's schemes, and certainly not with a man like Graham Westbrook, but it echoed now, loud and unyielding, and she didn't know what to do with it. She checked into a hotel downtown, a small, anonymous place where the hum of the city drowned out her thoughts. For 2 days, she stayed there, pacing the room, replaying every moment. His kiss, his warmth, Reese's cold dismissal. She didn't call Nadine, didn't text Graham, just sat with the wreckage of her heart, trying to piece it together. Was he lying? Was she a fool for wanting him still? The suitcase sat unpacked, a symbol of her indecision, and the crescent moon necklace lay on the nightstand, glinting like a question. On the third night, a knock jolted her from her haze. She opened the door, and there he was, Graham, rain-soaked and hollow-eyed, his coat clinging to his frame. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice flat, though her pulse raced. "I know people," he said, stepping inside when she didn't stop him. "Chanel, we need to talk." "We've talked," she said, crossing her arms. "You said you love me. I said I need time. What's left?" He shut the door behind him, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and faced her, his expression unguarded for once. "The truth," he said. "All of it. No more walls." She stared at him, wary but aching, and nodded. "Fine. Go." He took a breath, deep and unsteady, and started. "You were never part of a game, not the way you think. But I knew from the start you didn't love me. You came for the money. Your aunt made that clear, and I didn't care. I needed a wife, someone to fill a role, to keep the vultures off my back while I finished Erebus. That was the deal." Her stomach twisted, but she stayed silent, letting him continue. "I thought I could keep it simple," he said, his voice lowering. "Play the part, give you what you wanted, and let you go when it was done. But you didn't fit the script. You pushed. You stayed, you saw through me, and I couldn't stay cold. So I tried to protect myself, too." "Protect yourself?" she echoed, incredulous. "From what?" "From this," he said, gesturing between them. "From feeling anything real. Lila. She wasn't just a colleague or a lover. She was my partner in life and in Erebus. We built it together, a system to change everything. Tech. Power, the world. But she got reckless, trusted the wrong people, and it cost her. She died because of me, because I couldn't stop it." Chanel's breath caught, the pieces clicking into place. Lila's photo, his guilt, the journals. "Died how?" "An accident," he said, his voice cracking. "That's what they called it. A car crash late at night. But I know better. Someone wanted her gone. Someone tied to Erebus. I've been chasing it ever since, trying to finish what we started, to make it right. That's why Reese is on me. He's an investor, one of the few who know the stakes. He thinks you're a risk." "And you?" she asked, her throat tight. "What do you think?" He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto hers. "I think you're the only thing keeping me human. I told myself I'd let you go when the time came. Keep you safe, keep you out of this mess. But I couldn't. I fell for you, Chanel, even knowing you didn't feel the same. That's why I pushed you away. I was scared you'd leave anyway." She stared at him, her heart pounding, the room shrinking around them. You think I don't feel anything? After all this, the kiss, the fights, the way you look at me. I stayed, Graham. I didn't have to, but I did. His face softened, hope flickering in his eyes. Why? Because I love you too, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them, raw and terrifying. And it's breaking me apart. He closed the distance, his hands framing her face, his touch warm and steady. Then let it break us together, he murmured, and kissed her, soft at first, then desperate like he was pouring every unsaid thing into it. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, but when they pulled apart, breathless, the doubt lingered. What about Erebus? She asked. Reese, the people who hurt Lila? They're still out there, he admitted, his forehead resting against hers. But I'm done hiding from you. We'll face it, together. She nodded, her resolve hardening, but her mind raced. Love had twisted everything, her plan, his walls, their future. Erebus wasn't just a project, it was a threat, and now she was in its crosshairs too. The truth had dropped, but it wasn't the end. It was a beginning, sharp and uncertain. Chanel stood in the hotel room, Graham's kiss still warm on her lips, his hands steady on her face as he'd whispered, We'll face it, together. Her confession, I love you too, had slipped out, raw and reckless, binding them in a fragile truce. The truth about Lila's death, Erebus's dangerous stakes, and Graham's fear of losing her had stripped away the last of his walls. But the weight of it all pressed down on her. She'd nodded, agreeing to stand with him, but as his forehead rested against hers, her mind churned. Love had pulled her back from the edge, but Erebus was a shadow she couldn't outrun, and the people who'd silenced Lila were still out there, watching, waiting. They left the hotel together, her suitcase in his hand, the silence between them heavy but not cold. Back at the penthouse, the air felt different, less like a prison, more like a battlefield they'd chosen to share. Graham set her bag down and turned to her, his eyes softer but still shadowed. I meant it, he said, his voice low. No more secrets. Ask me anything. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the crescent moon necklace she'd slipped back on in the car. Later, she said, exhaustion tugging at her. I just need a minute. He nodded, brushing a kiss against her temple before heading to the kitchen. Coffee? He called, and she managed a faint smile. Sure, she replied, sinking onto the sofa. The storm of the past days, Nova, Reese, the overheard conversation, still echoed, but his presence grounded her, a tether she hadn't expected to need. She loved him. He loved her. It was real, messy, and terrifying, but it was theirs, until the journals pulled her back in. The next morning, Graham was out again. A quick errand, he'd said, promising to be back soon. Chanel wandered the penthouse, restless, her mind replaying his words about Lila, about Erebus. She found herself at the hidden room's door again, the one she'd stumbled into weeks ago. It wasn't locked this time. Graham had left it open, a quiet gesture of trust. She stepped inside, the dust less stifling now, the photographs on the corkboard less haunting. Lila's face stared back, a reminder of the stakes. But it was the journals that drew her. She picked up the one she'd dropped before, the worn leather, Graham's sharp handwriting, and flipped past the entry she'd read. She thought she could fool me too. Her heart thudded as she turned the pages, the dates jumping forward, closer to now. These weren't just about Lila or Erebus. They were about her. August 17th. She's sharper than I expected. Asked about the prenup today. Didn't flinch when I said she'd get nothing. I thought she'd run. She didn't. September 3rd. Breakfast again. She laughs at my cooking, but she eats it. I don't know why I keep doing this. She's here for the money. Nadine's niece, the gold digger I let in. But it doesn't feel like that anymore. Chanel's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she turned another page. The entries grew shorter, more jagged, like he was wrestling with himself. October 12th. She found the necklace. Watched her put it on in the mirror. Didn't say anything, just stood there. I shouldn't care what she thinks. I do. November 9th. The gala. She stood too close and I didn't push her away. I should have. I knew she didn't love me, knew it from the start, from the way she looked at me like a means to an end. But I'm falling anyway. Idiot. Her chest tightened, tears pricking her eyes. He'd been documenting it, every moment, every doubt, every time he'd let her in despite himself. She flipped to a later entry, dated just before the storm, before the kiss. January 14th. She's breaking me down, piece by piece. I told myself I'd keep her at arm's length, protect her, protect me. But tonight I almost told her everything. Lila's gone, and I thought that was the worst of it. This is worse. I love her, and she doesn't feel the same. She can't. She sank onto the desk chair, the journal heavy in her lap. He'd known, or thought he'd known. She didn't love him, and he'd fallen anyway, chronicling the slow bleed of it in these pages. The gifts, the breakfasts, the kiss. They weren't a game to keep her close. They were a man losing a fight he'd never meant to wage. And now, knowing she loved him too, the irony twisted her gut. He'd been guarding his heart while she'd been guarding hers, and they'd both been blind. The front door clicked open, Graham's voice calling out, "Chanel, you here?" She wiped her eyes, closing the journal but keeping it in her hands as she stepped into the living room. He stopped short, his coat half off, his gaze dropping to the leather in her grip. "You found it again," he said, not a question. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady despite the ache. "I read it. All of it." He tensed, his jaw tightening, but he didn't look away. "And you thought I didn't love you," she said, stepping closer, the journal a bridge between them. "You wrote it down. Every time you felt it, every time you pulled back. You were protecting yourself." He exhaled, sharp and uneven, and ran a hand through his hair. "I was. I knew why you came. Your aunt, the deal, the money. I told myself it didn't matter, that I could keep it clean. But you changed everything. I didn't want to feel this, Chanel. Not after Lila." She set the journal on the coffee table, her fingers lingering on its edge. "I changed it too. I didn't come here to love you. I came to survive. But I do, Graham. I love you, and it scares the hell out of me." His eyes softened, a flicker of relief breaking through the tension. "You don't have to be scared. Not of me." "But I am," she said, her voice trembling. "Because of Erebus, because of Lila. Because loving you means I'm in this, all of it, and I don't know if we'll make it out." He crossed to her, his hands framing her face, his touch firm but gentle. "We will. I swear it. I've lost too much already. I'm not losing you." She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest, and let the tears fall. The journals had bared his soul, and she'd bared hers. But Erebus still loomed, a threat neither could ignore. Love had bound them, but it had also painted a target on her back, and the fight was just beginning. Chanel clung to Graham in the living room, her tears soaking into his shirt as his arms tightened around her. The journal rested on the coffee table, its pages a raw map of his heart, every doubt, every moment he'd fallen for her while believing she didn't feel the same. She'd confessed her love, laid bare her fear, and his promise, "I'm not losing you," echoed between them, a vow against the shadow of Erebus. The weight of it all, Lila's death, the threat still lurking, pressed down, but in his embrace she felt the first stirrings of something solid, something they could fight for. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, and met his gaze, steady despite the storm inside her. "We're a mess, aren't we?" she said, a faint laugh breaking through her tears. Graham's lips twitched, a rare softness in his expression. Yeah, but it's our mess. She nodded, her fingers brushing the journal's edge. I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. He tensed, but didn't pull away. Anything. She took a breath, steadying herself. Did you ever think I'd stay? Really stay, not for the money, not for the deal, but for you. He looked down, his jaw working, then met her eyes again. Number. Not at first. I thought you'd take what you came for and go. That's why I wrote it all down, kept it locked away. I was waiting for you to leave even when I didn't want you to. The honesty stung, but it matched the pages she'd read. She stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. You weren't wrong. I didn't come here to love you. I came to survive. But you weren't wrong about me staying either. I did, Graham. And I'm still here. His hand found hers, his grip warm and anchoring. I wasn't wrong about loving you, he said, his voice rough. But I was wrong about keeping you out. I thought it'd protect us both. She shook her head, a tear slipping free. Neither was I. I thought I could keep my walls up, play the part and walk away. But I needed you, needed this more than I knew. Maybe we both needed to be loved differently. He stared at her, his eyes searching, then pulled her close again, his breath ragged against her hair. Differently how? Like this, she whispered, tilting her face up to his. Messy. Real. Not perfect, but ours. He kissed her then, slow and deep, a collision of need and relief that melted the last of her doubts. Her hands slid up his chest, his curled into her hair, and the world narrowed to the heat of him, the steady thud of his heart against hers. When they broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, a quiet laugh escaping him. You're gonna kill me, you know that? Likewise, she said, smiling despite herself. But I'd rather die with you than without you. His eyes darkened, not with fear, but with something fiercer, love, unguarded and fierce. Then stay, he said. Really stay. No more running. She nodded, her throat tight. No more running. The night unfolded like a promise kept. They moved to the bedroom, not the guest room she'd claimed, but his, a space she'd rarely entered. It was simple, unadorned, but it felt like him. Quiet, steady, a refuge from the chaos outside. He lit a lamp, casting a warm glow across the room, and they sat on the bed, talking, really talking, for the first time in months. He told her about Lila, not just her death, but her life, their dreams for Erebus, the way she'd laughed at his terrible coffee, the guilt that still gnawed at him. Chanel listened, her hand in his, and shared her own scars, Detroit's grind, Nadine's schemes, the fear of never being enough. You're enough, he said, his voice firm, cutting through her story. More than enough. She smiled, tears welling again, and leaned into him. So are you. The talking gave way to touching, soft at first, his fingers tracing her jaw, her lips brushing his knuckles. Then it deepened, a slow burn that built into something urgent, electric. Clothes fell away and they moved together, not rushed but deliberate, every touch a reclamation, every whisper a stitch in the fabric they'd torn apart. It was emotional, physical, a reconnection that erased the distance of secrets and doubt. She felt him, really felt him, and he her, their breaths mingling, their bodies a map of forgiveness and trust. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the city humming beyond the windows, the lamp still casting its soft light. Chanel rested her head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and traced lazy circles on his skin. What happens now? She asked, her voice quiet but not afraid. He shifted, propping himself up to look at her. We fight, Erebus. It's not done with us. Reese, the others. They'll come. But we're in this together. She nodded, her resolve hardening. Together. He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering, and pulled her closer. "I love you," he murmured, the words a vow now, not a grenade. "I love you too," she said, and for the first time it didn't hurt to say it. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, the night a bridge between their broken pasts and the uncertain future. Erebus loomed, a battle they'd face, but this moment, this love, was theirs, and it was whole. Okay, quick pause here. Do you believe two broken people can build something whole? Tell us below. What makes love worth the risk? I'd love to hear your thoughts, because Chanel and Graham are betting everything on it, and the fight's not over yet. The morning came soft and gray, rain tapping the windows, but inside the warmth held. Chanel woke first, Graham's arm heavy across her waist, his breath slow and even. She watched him, the lines of his face smoothed in sleep, and felt a quiet strength settle in her chest. They'd reconciled, not just with words, but with every touch, every shared truth. Erebus waited, a storm they couldn't avoid, but for now, they'd found their footing. Together, Chanel woke to the soft rhythm of rain against the penthouse windows, Graham's arm a warm weight across her waist. The night before had been a lifeline, hours of talking, touching, reconnecting in a way that stitched their frayed edges back together. His confession, "I love you," and hers in return had sealed something unbreakable between them, a bond forged in the wreckage of secrets and doubt. She'd traced his heartbeat in the quiet, her fears about Erebus and the fight ahead tempered by the certainty of him beside her. They'd reconciled body and soul, and as she watched him sleep, his face unguarded, she felt a flicker of peace, a rare, precious thing. Graham stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and caught her staring. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Morning," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You look less like a billionaire tyrant when you're asleep." He chuckled, pulling her closer. "Good to know. You look less like a runaway bride." She laughed, the sound light and free, and nestled into him. "I'm not running anymore. You're stuck with me." "Promise?" he asked, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. "Promise," she said, and kissed him, soft, lingering, a seal on the night they'd reclaimed. The day unfolded slowly, a quiet rhythm of coffee and shared glances, but beneath it, a current of resolve grew. Erebus wasn't gone. Reese's words, Nova's warnings, Lila's death still cast long shadows. But they'd face it together. Over breakfast, Graham's hand found hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "We need something new," he said, his voice steady. "A clean start." She tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze, unwavering. "Us. No prenup, no games. Just you and me, for real." Her heart skipped, the weight of his words sinking in. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he said, standing and pulling her up with him. "Marry me again, Chanel. Not for the cameras, not for anyone else. Just us." She stared at him, her throat tight, then nodded, a smile breaking through. "Yes." 2 weeks later, they stood in the rooftop garden, the city sprawling below, the air crisp with spring. No guests, no photographers, just a judge friend of Graham's, a simple vow, and the two of them. Chanel wore a white dress she'd picked herself, flowing, unpretentious, while Graham stood in a dark sweater and slacks, his gray eyes bright with something new, hope. The judge's voice was a quiet hum, but their words cut through. "I didn't know I could love like this," Graham said, his hands holding hers, his voice rough but clear. "You changed everything, Chanel. I vow to fight for you, to trust you, to be the man you deserve, not just the one you got." She blinked back tears, squeezing his hands. "I came here for a way out, but I found a home. I vow to stand with you, to love you through the mess, Because you're worth it, every broken piece. They slipped new rings onto each other's fingers, plain bands, no flash, just meaning, and kissed, slow and deep, the city their only witness. The judge slipped away with a discreet nod, leaving them alone, husband and wife, in a way they'd never been before. Graham pulled her close, his breath warm against her hair. "No turning back," he murmured. "No turning back," she echoed, and meant it. The weeks that followed were a quiet shift. Erebus still loomed. Graham met with lawyers, tightened security, dug into the threats tied to Lila's death. But their renewed bond held firm. Chanel found herself restless, not with doubt, but with purpose. One night, over wine on the terrace, she turned to him, her mind buzzing. "I want to do something," she said. "Something real." He raised an eyebrow, setting his glass down. "Like what?" "A foundation," she said, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. "For women like me, stuck, desperate, clawing their way up. I got out because of you, but not everyone has a billionaire to marry. They need a chance." Graham's face softened, a proud glint in his eyes. "You've got a name in mind?" "Second Start," she said, smiling, "because that's what you gave me." He leaned forward, his hand covering hers. "It's yours. Whatever you need, money, connections, I'll make it happen." True to his word, he did. Second Start launched quietly. No press, no fanfare, just a small office downtown and a mission to offer grants, training, and hope to women trapped by circumstance. Chanel poured herself into it, meeting with applicants, building a team, her days filled with a purpose she'd never known. She didn't notice at first that the funding came from an anonymous donor, a steady stream that kept the lights on and the dreams alive. It wasn't until she found a bank statement on Graham's desk, millions funneled through a shell account, that she pieced it together. "You're funding it," she said that night, standing in his office, the paper in her hand. He looked up from his laptop, caught off guard, then shrugged. "Guilty." "Why anonymously?" she asked, crossing to him. He stood, meeting her halfway. "Because it's yours, not mine. I didn't want my name on it, didn't want it to be about me. You're the one making it work." She stared at him, her chest tight with gratitude, then pulled him into a kiss, fierce, thankful. "You're impossible," she murmured against his lips. "You're welcome," he said, grinning, and kissed her back. They settled into a new rhythm, her days at Second Start, his unraveling Erebus's knots, their nights a sanctuary of shared strength. The threat wasn't gone. Phone calls came late, cryptic and tense, and Graham's jaw tightened more often. But they faced it as a unit, no prenups, no games. One evening, as they stood on the terrace, the city lights glittering below, Chanel leaned into him, her voice soft. "We're gonna be okay, right?" He wrapped an arm around her, his grip steady. "Better than okay. We've got this." She nodded, believing him, and let the moment hold them. A new beginning, hard-won and theirs. "Okay, quick pause here. Do you believe two broken people can build something whole? Tell us below. What makes love worth the risk?" Chanel and Graham started with nothing but cracks, and now they've got a foundation, literal and not. Drop your thoughts, because their story's proof it's possible, even with storms still brewing. The rain picked up again, a gentle patter against the glass, and they stayed there, watching it fall. Erebus wasn't finished with them. Secrets lingered, enemies watched. But this life they'd built was a start, a real one. Chanel leaned into Graham on the terrace, the city lights a constellation below them, his arm a steady anchor as rain tapped the glass. Their renewed vows still echoed in her mind, simple, honest, free of prenups and pretense, while Second Start hummed along, her days filled with purpose, his with quiet support. The threat of Erebus lingered, tense calls, late nights poring over files. But they'd built something real, a new beginning carved from their broken pieces. She smiled up at him, his gray eyes catching the glow, and felt a certainty she hadn't known she could claim. "We've got this," he'd said, and she believed it, even with storms on the horizon. The next morning, Graham left early, a meeting with his security team, he'd said, kissing her forehead before slipping out. Chanel lingered in bed, the sheets still warm from him, a quiet contentment settling over her. But as she rose, a wave of nausea hit, sharp and unexpected, sending her stumbling to the bathroom. She gripped the sink, her reflection pale in the mirror, and brushed it off. Stress, maybe, or something she'd eaten. But it happened again the next day and the day after, a persistent tug she couldn't ignore. By the end of the week, she sat on the edge of the tub, a pregnancy test in her hand, the two pink lines staring back at her like a secret she hadn't asked for. Her breath caught, her mind racing. Pregnant. It didn't make sense. She'd been careful, they'd been careful, and Graham had told her early on in one of their first clipped conversations that he'd had a vasectomy years ago after Lila. No kids, he'd said, his tone final, and she'd accepted it, her plan never hinging on a family anyway. But here it was, undeniable, and the shock rooted her in place. She paced the penthouse, the test clutched in her fist, her heart a tangle of joy and confusion. How? When? She needed answers, and Graham owed her them. When he walked through the door that afternoon, his coat dusted with rain, she didn't wait. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but edged, holding up the test. He stopped, his eyes flicking to the stick, then to her face, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, yes, but not the kind she'd expected. It was softer, almost knowing. "You're pregnant," he said, not a question, his voice low and careful. "Yeah," she said, stepping closer. "And you're gonna tell me how, because last I checked, you couldn't." "I reversed it," he cut in, his gaze steady, unflinching. "Months ago." Her breath hitched, the words landing like a stone. "What?" He set his coat down, crossing to her, his hands outstretched but halting when she stepped back. "I had it reversed," he said again, slower, like he was laying out a truth he'd buried. "Back in November, after the gala, after you started mattering." She stared at him, her mind spinning. November, before the kiss, before Nova, before she'd overheard Reese. "You didn't tell me," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't ask." "I know," he said, his jaw tightening. "I didn't think it'd happen. Not then. I wasn't sure we'd even make it this far. But I hoped, Chanel. I hoped for a future, even when you didn't." Her chest tightened, a flood of emotions crashing through her. Anger, betrayal, something softer she couldn't name. "You hoped," she echoed, incredulous. "You went behind my back, changed everything, and didn't say a word. What if I didn't want this? What if I wasn't ready?" He flinched, but didn't look away. "I'd have lived with that. I'd have supported whatever you chose. But I couldn't tell you. Not when I thought you'd leave, not when I was still figuring out how to let you in. It was selfish, I know. I wanted something real with you, something permanent, even if I didn't deserve it." She sank onto the sofa, the test still in her hand, her thoughts a storm. "You should have trusted me," she said, her voice breaking. "After everything, the journals, the vows, I thought we were done with secrets." "We are," he said, kneeling in front of her, his hands resting lightly on her knees. "This was the last one. I swear it. I didn't do it to trap you, Chanel. I did it because I love you. Because I saw a life with you, even when I thought you didn't see one with me." She looked at him, his face raw with guilt and hope, and felt the anger ebb, replaced by a quiet ache. He'd kept this from her, yes, but he'd done it out of a longing she recognized, the same longing that had kept her here, that had turned a marriage of convenience into something true. She set the test down, her hand finding his, and squeezed. "You're an idiot," she murmured, tears slipping free. "I know," he said, a faint smile breaking through. "But I'm your idiot." She laughed, soft and shaky, and pulled him up beside her. "A baby," she said, testing the word, letting it settle. "We're having a baby." "Yeah," he said, his arm sliding around her, his voice thick. "We are." They sat there, tangled together, the rain a steady hum outside. The shock lingered, but so did the possibility, a future neither had planned but both wanted, now that it was here. Erebus still loomed, a fight they'd face, but this child was a new beginning, one Graham had dared to hope for when she couldn't. "Okay, let's wrap this up. Would you trust someone who kept secrets to protect your heart? Or would that feel like betrayal? Let's talk in the comments. I want to hear what you think because Chanel and Graham's story hinges on that question, and it's not an easy answer. The penthouse grew quiet, the city stretching out beyond them, and Chanel rested her head on Graham's shoulder, her hand on her stomach. Sometimes we marry for money, but we stay for the truth, even when it takes time to recognize it. Thank you for watching, beautiful story family. See you in the next one.